The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning and welcome to our first of two webinars focused on leveraging your customer database. I'd like to extend a very special welcome to our VingDirect members and of course all of you who are attending for the first time to our webinar. My name is Tammy Boatwright and I'm founder and president of VingDirect. At VingDirect, we help family wineries grow their sales to consumers. Educating winery teams is a really important part of our mission, and this webinar series is the first of many that we'll conduct in 2016. So there's just a bit of housekeeping before we begin. You're going to notice in the right-hand section of your screen that there's a section for questions. Don't hesitate, and in fact, we encourage you to send questions throughout the webinar, and we're going to answer as many of those questions as we can at the end of the session as time allows. And I'm going to remind you occasionally to send in your questions. Also, if you have technical difficulties, that's where you'd send us a note and one of the Vingettes will get right back to you. So we know that your time is really valuable, so let's get started. Just a reminder that this is the, sorry, just one moment. This is the image you're going to see when I'm reminding you to ask questions throughout the webinar. And don't forget to do that as we go through, because sometimes what has happened is that we get to the end of the webinar, we don't have a chance to answer your question because you're just now sending them in. Also, to let you know, we are recording this session and you're going to receive a link to the recordings after the final session. You'll also receive a PDF of the presentation, but we encourage you to take notes because the presentation slides don't include a lot of detail. Would you be surprised to learn that you have an incredible amount of value hiding in your winery? Would you believe me if I told you, it looks like, hold on one second. Sorry about that. So let's start. Would you be surprised to know that you have an incredible amount of value hiding in your winery? And would you believe me if I told you that the largest value and the greatest value in your winery is actually not in your inventory, but in the untapped potential of your customer database? I really believe that if winery teams understood the value hiding in their database, that they would invest more of their time and attention to ensuring that they capture and leverage customer data. And that's what we're really going to be focused on today. The most challenging part for a winery, honestly, is less in knowing how to use the data and more about getting their teams to actually collect the data. That's the biggest problem and the biggest challenge that we see in the industry. So we're going to focus on that challenge today. So are you selling wine or buying customers? I hope to change your view of this today. Most wineries believe they're selling wine, and that's why they're in business. I believe that you are actually buying customers, and especially through the tasting room, that is your goal. How would your world view change if you took the long-term view and started building customers? Whether you sell a bottle or a case of wine, if you don't capture data, you've just lost a huge opportunity and a lot of money. Let's think about that. A bottle of wine in your inventory delivers an immediate profit, but owning a customer, most importantly, owning a customer with contact information, delivers a long-term profit and potential for future profits. So when you sell a bottle or a case of wine without obtaining customer information, that's a very short-term solution. Think about it this way. For every case of wine you sell without obtaining purchaser information, you have to find a new customer to sell that same case of wine to next year. That's not a direct-to-consumer marketing principle. It's retail sales. And I believe that you at the winery need to be in the direct-to-consumer marketing world, not retail sales. Here's a shocking fact. 80 to 90% of your tasters will leave your tasting room with no trace that they've ever been to your winery, unless you change something. What are the benefits of obtaining that customer contact information? With contact information, you have the opportunity to invite future purchases through email, e-commerce, and outbound telemarketing. And it's more likely that a customer will repurchase from you if they know you, and if they've had an experience in your tasting room, they're more likely to purchase from you than taking a chance on another wine brand. But if they're never reminded or asked to purchase from you, your customers will be distracted by the winery who does a better job of contacting them and developing a relationship, or they're going to be distracted by the wine supermarket shelves. With contact information, you have the opportunity to build a relationship, brand awareness, and wine sales. You know what? Oftentimes when we ask wineries, we first start doing business with a winery, we ask how large is your customer list? They might tell us thousands or tens of thousands. But when we ask them the second question, how many people on that list can you actually contact? So who has a phone, an email address, or a mailing address that we can use? Typically, the number drops to only 20 to 30% who actually have contact information. Here's the mantra. A customer name or a purchase in your database with no contact information is useless. The second reason to collect customer information is asset value. Your customers are an asset to you, and they may also be assets to other industries or businesses. So for a family winery, if you think that one day you may sell the business, or you may want to go to the bank to get financing for your business, a customer database is definitely an asset that not only you begin to realize the value of that, but bankers and investors also realize the value of that database. And finally, what's the dollar value of customer contact information to your winery today? The tasting room is still the largest acquisition channel for consumers. So our numbers, the numbers we're going to be talking about today, are based on that first experience being in the tasting room versus the first experience being on your e-commerce site. Those numbers really do vary greatly. So the largest value for a consumer begins in the tasting room when they build a relationship with your team and your brand. So here are the facts. The lifetime value for a customer for whom we have contact information is between $125 to $2,500. So let's break that down. $125 is the average lifetime value for a customer who purchased in the tasting room and receives an email or two a year from our winery. That's based on a $25 average price point for wine. Customers who join the wine club purchase approximately $500 in wine club shipments and an additional $300 annually in purchases in the tasting room, events, and e-commerce. And they stay in the club for about 18 months. So club member lifetime value is around $1,200 on the low end. Compare that to the purchaser for whom we have no contact information. So this person purchased from you in the tasting room, but you didn't get their email address, a phone number, or any other way to contact them. Guess what? Their average lifetime value is around $45 because chances are they will never come back to your tasting room, and they're going to purchase 1.5 bottles when they see you that first day to 1.8 bottles. So this illustrates the power of collecting contact information from purchasers. And of course, you have it for wine club members as part of their club membership. So this is a reminder, if you've already got questions, please start sending those in so that we do have time at the end of our presentation to answer your questions. You know, a common metric in direct-to-consumer businesses is the acquisition cost. And the reason I wanted to talk with you about acquisition cost today is that it's a metric we need to get more comfortable with in the wine industry. My career has been focused on acquiring customers. I've worked with several direct-to-consumer businesses during my career and entered the wine industry in 1998 when I joined International Wine Accessories in Dallas. And our common practice in every direct-to-consumer business, like Sur La Table, Williams-Sonoma, Harry and David, when you think about the traditional direct-to-consumer businesses, those businesses are renting lists to acquire customers. That is their practice. They're hoping that through smart list rentals that they're going to find customers who are interested in their products. The average cost of acquiring a customer when you're renting lists is, including marketing cost and depending on your product, is around $50 per customer to acquire a customer. Now, in the wine industry, we don't rent lists. And in fact, when we've tested that, or when I've tested that through other businesses, it really has not been very successful. Why not? Because wine, number one, is a consumable product, and guests or customers, prospective customers, probably need to taste that product or have a recommendation, whether it's a critic or a friend, before they're actually going to trust us enough to try the product through the mail or through a website. So customers still are being acquired primarily in the wine industry through the tasting room by building relationships and tasting your products. So the good news for the wine industry, we have customers literally knocking on our doors every day saying, I think I'm going to like what you offer. I want to try it. And if you deliver the relationship that I'm expecting and the experience, by the way, I may join the wine club. I certainly am going to want to have a relationship with you. So if you wanted to calculate your acquisition cost in the wine industry, but you're not sending out rental, you're not renting lists, you're not sending out mailings, you're not doing cold calling, how do we calculate your cost of attrition? Well, if you want to have a really hair-raising experience, let's face it, the tasting room is your primary way of acquiring new customers and building a database. So if you wanted to calculate your true cost, you actually would need to look at the tasting room as your cost of acquisition. Because haven't you built the tasting room, hired the team, and aren't you keeping those doors open to sell some wine, but also to acquire customers? What are those costs? Payroll, cost of the wine poured, marketing costs, the list goes on. If you wanted to get your true cost of acquisition, you would divide that annual cost by the number of customers for whom you acquire contact information. And I would even go a little bit further to say you'd want to divide that by the number of purchasers you acquired in the tasting room, because purchasers are actually your best prospects going forward. So how many new customers with contact information did you acquire in 2015? Divide that number by the expense of your tasting room and tell me, how much does it cost you to acquire a new customer? Probably pretty scary. Now, how many customers slipped through the net? How many people bought a bottle or a case of wine and left with only a footprint? You don't know any more about them than when they walked through the door. And here's my final question for you. What would your customer acquisition cost be if you acquired contact information for 80% or better yet for all of your purchasers? Your cost per customer would decline dramatically. So what do you need? What's the investment for customer acquisition? Don't worry about it. You've already made the investment. You've built a tasting room, most likely, if you're on this call. You're opening the doors, you're staffing it every day. So you've already made the investment. The only question is whether you're going to leverage it to get a better return. So how can you create a better return and realize the hidden value within your business? First, we're going to make sure your team is trained to capture data at the point of sale. Second, you do need some tools in place to capture customer data. And third, your guest experience has to be such that your process for capturing data is true to your brand and adds to your guest perception of your winery. So, first, I'm going to ask you, as we do with all of the Ving Direct initiatives, you need to set goals for data capture. That's part of your staff training. They need to understand, what are you looking for? Do you want me to sign up everyone who is at the bar? Do we want to sign up 50% of those people? Do you want me to focus on purchasers? You need a benchmark for measuring success, just as you do with selling wine and converting guests to club members. So, find out how many email addresses and phone numbers you're capturing today so you can set realistic goals. Communicate those goals to your team and communicate the results of their efforts at hospitality meetings or huddle-ups. Finally, you've got to have a process in place for your team members and train them. They're not going to do it without training. It's uncomfortable. Any new practice is uncomfortable. So train them on the best way to ask for the information and role play or practice with them until they feel comfortable asking for contact information. Because you already know this, but if your staff feels comfortable, they're more likely to invite guests to join the mailing list. So we're going to talk about some best practices for gathering data in just a minute. And again, your goal, obviously, we'd love to get an email address from every guest, but that may not happen. So train your team to ask for contact information just from every guest who purchases wine. Again, those are your best prospects for future marketing anyway. Here's some tips for data capture. One of the best practices that we've seen in action is to extend the invitation during the second or third pour versus waiting until the end of the experience. So many times in the wine industry, we've seen that the host waits until the very end of the tasting experience, puts the newsletter list or a card out on the bar and asks the guest to sign up. Look, those guests are already gone mentally. On the last pour, they're already thinking about where they're going to go next. Perhaps they purchased some wine or not. They feel like they've already done their part. They've done what they were supposed to do. They had the tasting. Instead, put down a simple card, 3x5 card, on the second or third pour. And again, make sure this card reflects your brand image. And have the host explain to them what they'll receive if they join your list, and also what won't happen. You're not going to share their names or their identities with any other organization. It's going to stay in-house. We send a newsletter every quarter. You're going to receive information about sales or new releases, our library releases, events that we're having, and just leave the card there, because they may want something to do during the tasting. They may decide as a couple or if they're with friends to complete that form, and you just then take it away, put it away behind the counter somewhere. If it doesn't get completed, no worries. Just pick it up at the end of the tasting. Do consider loyalty programs for your guests and your purchasers. Think about this. If you had a loyalty program to offer everyone who bought a bottle of wine, for example, we're going to keep track of your purchases and you're going to get, really sweet offers or deals or gifts or invitations from us that are exclusive, I would be more likely to join your list if I loved your wine and if I wanted to have a relationship, if you were incenting me with a loyalty program. Vino Pro has a great kiosk. Vino Pro is an outbound telemarketing company. They've actually created a kiosk that you can put in your tasting room, and it's a way for your guests to actually give you phone numbers, because that's what Vino Pro uses, of course, to contact guests. And they've actually had great success in selling wine to guests, whether they purchased or not. But if you don't want to use a kiosk from another vendor, make your own. Consider an iPad on the counter that has rolling screenshots of your winery or of events, people in the shots, and end with an email invitation that they complete on your iPad. If you don't already use a point-of-sale provider who allows you to email your receipts to your guest, consider some other way to get that. Hopefully your point-of-sale provider offers that, because all of us really want to save paper today. Again, this This is going to be successful depending on your team's presentation of it. So consider the way that they're presenting it and make sure everyone's trained. But when someone purchases something, they should be offered the opportunity to receive their receipt via email versus carrying a piece of paper. The same is true with shipping or tracking information. If I'm Tammy from Texas and I've just ordered a case of wine from you and I want it to be shipped back to Texas, it's really a convenience and a benefit to me if you offer to provide me with the shipping or tracking information via email. We did this 20 years ago with businesses that I was involved with, and it works because guests see that as a benefit and a service. Consider some contests, whether it's guess the corks, the jelly beans, whatever, and draw, provided you have an email address, and the winner can receive something off their next purchase with you. Again, that's one kind of creative way to do it. There are hundreds more. Photo booths where you're emailing or sending pictures back to people with their email address. And always ask for an email address when ringing up the purchase. What could it hurt? I like to think of this as ABC. Always be collecting and always be thinking of new ways you can collect information, not only in the tasting room, but maybe with other partners that you have. Think about building your database, ABC. This is just another reminder. If you have thought of some questions, please send those now so that we have time, because our presentation is coming to a close in just a few minutes. So let's talk a little bit about guest experience. You know, the guest experience is really important. As we know, everything begins and ends with that. So I want you to think about how you're incorporating data capture into different stages of your guest experience. Most importantly, in a way that is authentic and welcoming. So if you ask for your guest's email address in exchange for winery newsletters or special offers or invitations to events, then be sure you fulfill that promise. The guest experience begins in the tasting room, but when you have contact information, remember you're going to be extending the guest experience through emails, events, mailings, maybe even phone calls. So you've got to be sure that the guest experience that you're offering through those other contacts matches or exceeds the level that you had in the tasting room. Make sure those pieces reflect your brand image. Find fun and unique ways of asking for guest contact information throughout your experiences. If you're giving tours of the vineyard or the property, consider, a way to get their email addresses throughout the tour. Finally, we recommend mystery tasting to see and make sure that the guest experience is what you want it to be when you launch anything new in the tasting room, but especially data capture techniques, because we never want your winery to come off as being, invading privacy or too much. Whether you engage a company like us to do mystery tasting or you choose to invite your own secret shoppers, make sure that data capture is part of your scorecard. So make sure that there's a question on the scorecard asking the guest, did someone invite you to join our email list? Did someone ask you for your contact information as we rung up the sale? Did someone put that card down on the second or third pour? Make sure that that's part of the scorecard, and also that your guests really appreciated that and didn't find it to be intrusive. So I'd like to leave you with a final thought. Consider how many wineries are within an hour's drive of yours. Chances are, depending on your region, there may be hundreds of wineries within driving distance, let's say an hour of your winery. Studies show that guests will choose to visit 8 during a weekend or 3-day vacation to a wine region. So if your winery is one of the 8, consider what a miracle it is that a guest walks through your door. Think about that. They chose you out of 8 of hundreds that they could visit. So don't let your guest footprints be the only information they leave behind. So let's take a few minutes now to see about questions. And if you've had questions, be happy to answer those. Yes. So customers are becoming increasingly unwilling to give emails How to overcome their objections realistically? That's a really good question. As we would say with any objection or feedback from a customer, I would view if they have feedback for you or a comment about emails and perhaps they don't want to give those to you, I would ask why. Find out what's really behind that objection, provided you've given them enough benefits up front. So make sure your team is actually stressing the benefits. And as we do with all of our training, I would even paint a picture of the benefits. Last year we had a great paella event and we had a flamenco show, and I want to make sure that you're on the list to receive information about those events. I think you'd really enjoy them. So again, paint a picture of the event first. Make sure the guest understands the benefits of signing up, or if you think they're a value shopper, occasionally we send out great offers, discounts on our products, or special releases if the guest seems to be liking exclusivity. So again, as with anything else in the tasting room, you have to know who's in front of you, what is it that they value, tailor the invitation to sign up for the email newsletter that way, and if they do have objections, ask more questions, ask more open-ended questions. Oh, I hear you saying that you don't feel comfortable signing up for the email list. Tell me about that. What's your concern? Because maybe we haven't answered the concern. Most consumers are afraid that their information is going to be shared. If they trust you and if you've told them that it's not going to be shared, and if they want a relationship with you and they know that they're not going to be over-contacted, chances are they will share the information with you. And if not, don't worry about it. Those will be the exceptions. What are the most important pieces of information to gather in the tasting room? This viewer or this attendee currently gathers first name, last name, email, zip code, purchase history, and select interest. So for example, and it says contact type they enter later. If you are currently gathering first name, last name, email, you're probably light years ahead of most other wineries. That is, if you're capturing that information for guests and purchasers. Everyone captures it for club members. But if you're capturing that information, you're doing a great job already. The final piece would be phone number, of course. If you can get a phone number, that is very beneficial. Outbound telemarketing is a really valuable channel, as we'll see in tomorrow's session. At what point is the best time to collect this information? I think we maybe have addressed that during the content here. I believe the second or third pour is actually the best time to collect the information. But don't think about only bar tastings. If you're giving tours, if you've got seated tastings, think about doing something similar, kind of midway through the experience to capture that information then. And of course, every purchase at the register, you've got to be asking for that. Will you touch on any ways to capture new customers outside of the tasting room? Let's bring that question back for tomorrow. I think it is a good question. As I said at the beginning of the session, the tasting room, I'll be honest with you, is still the #1 acquisition channel. So if you're thinking of capturing customer information, for example, at events or at industry events, it is not only challenging, but it's also shown to be pretty pointless, because those guests, if you will, those folks attending large events are really just there to have the experience that they've paid for. And unless the best prospect for you for the future is someone who has purchased from you. I can't stress that enough. So just because I visited your tasting room and you get my email address doesn't mean I can convert to a purchaser. But if I've already purchased something from you, I'm your highest prospect for future marketing. How often should you contact customers without annoying them? We're definitely going to cover that in during tomorrow's session. So we'll hold that question for tomorrow. Any other questions before we close the session? Okay, great. Thank you so much for your attention and for attending today. We'll meet together tomorrow again at 9 o'clock Pacific time. And tomorrow we are going to be talking about, because club members are your best actually your best opportunity to get a great database going. We're also going to talk about some of those incremental sales techniques to wine club members and purchasers. So we're going to talk about how often to contact those folks, what kinds of contact works the best. So we're going to cover some of that or much of that in tomorrow's session. Thank you again for attending. Have a great day.